with giving life to the next generation. So I think as we start this discussion on abortion, on what it means, there's a lot of opinions on either side, but one thing that we have seen that's occurred recently, the American people, for the first time, the public opinion show that over 51% of Americans claim they are pro-life. This is one of the highest ratings we've ever seen. Part of that, I think, is because of science, because science shows us human development of the unborn child. And the more that we learn about the unborn child, the fascination, the intricacy, the beauty of the unborn child, the more we embrace giving life to this beautiful treasure and to this beautiful gift. And that brings us to our subject this evening, dealing with D.C. And there's a few things that I wanted to mention in my remarks. The taxpayer funding of abortion also increases the number of abortions. So when we put tax money into the equation, we'll get more abortions. And it makes sense. It's practical. And that's according to the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood. The Guttmacher Institute also routinely reports showing that when public funding is not available, 30% fewer women who receive Medicaid have abortions. Now, this is interesting because it means 30% more babies whose mothers receive government-subsidized health care survive because abortion funding restrictions. And this is, I think, particularly important for women and men in the African American communities, in the Latino communities, in communities of color. We see a very high percentage of abortions. And I know one of our colleagues, Congressman Trent Franks, speaks about this often. He has a tremendous heart, as we do as well, for unborn children in the minority community, because such a grossly high percentage of babies in the African American Latino community are aborted. And we don't want to see that. These babies add to the richness of American fabric, just as Caucasian babies do. All babies are valuable, but what we're seeing is an even higher percentage of babies that are losing their life in the minority community. In particular, we see this with minorities as they access Medicaid funding. If they have Medicaid funding, government funding, we'll see more abortions, and we'll see that particularly in the minority communities. This is a common ground issue, I think, that we can share with those who embrace a pro-abortion view and those who embrace a pro-life view, because the polls have shown very clearly that a majority of Americans do not support taxpayer-funded abortion. They don't support it. And we're here to represent the will and the interests of the American people. And that's not where the American people are at right now. They don't want to see us spending their money when we don't have much, when this government is in the red ink up to our eyeballs. We don't have money to pay for the intentional murder of unborn children. And the Obama budget changes this Dornan Amendment, as my colleague Mrs. Schmidt has said, to the Financial Services Appropriations Bill so that publicly funded abortions will once again be available in the District of Columbia. So right here where we stand this evening, this is the District of Columbia. And so now, once again, President Obama is expanding abortion. Instead of making it rare, instead of making it safer, this is making more abortions, particularly for babies of preborn babies of color. The District of Columbia has a record of abusing taxpayer funds for abortion. It's bad news, but it's true news. In the 1980s, when the district had the most permissive abortion funding policy in this country, abortions were funded for anyone, not just Medicaid recipients. Elizabeth Reveal was the D.C. budget director at the time. She, quote, confirmed that the district's government has a policy of funding abortion on demand and did not attempt to determine the circumstances of the pregnancy. D.C. allows minors, that's children, to receive abortion services without the consent of their parents. So imagine that. Here in D.C., children can receive an abortion without their parents' consent, which means that the American taxpayer will be funding abortions, paying for them for children. And minors could easily be brought in from other states. Remember, D.C. is only about 10 miles square. So minors could be transported across state lines, brought to D.C. from other states to have abortions paid for by the American taxpayer right here in Washington, D.C. to avoid the parental notification laws in their home states. And that's according to the Alan Guttmacher Institute, according to Planned Parenthood. They don't have accurate numbers on abortions in D.C. due to women from other states coming to D.C. for abortions. There's problems here with this, deep problems with this measure, and that's why we had the Dornan Amendment. It made sense. It was only reasonable. And so, unfortunately, under the Obama administration, we are taking the Band-Aid off this problem and exposing it to even more infection. And the infection is more money. And we know that more money will lead to more abortions, and particularly more abortions for babies of color. This is really a sad story, and we don't want to just talk about sad stories because life is such a wonderful story. We would love to just be here this evening and talk about the positive story of life, and it's a beautiful story. But this is a really ugly story because it's about expanding more abortion, more misery for women who are forced into abortions, often against their will, who are given incomplete, inadequate information, and may be headed for a lifetime of addiction or depression or a sense of loss and grief that they may have to deal with for 10, 15, 20 years. We don't want this to happen. We want women to be dignified. We don't want women to be brutalized. And that's why we're here this evening, because we really believe in women, and we believe in women's choices, empowering women. This doesn't empower women to put them in a situation where they're forced to do something quite often by pressure from boyfriends who are careless and from parents who don't want to be bothered. So I just want to, again, thank Representative Jean Schmidt. She has a heart of love. She has a heart of love on this issue. And she has, with her courage and with her dignity, brought together this group of women here on the House floor this evening, and men, who believe very strongly that American women will be hurt by this bill. Certainly American children will be hurt by this bill. And I thank you for your courage in bringing this forward this evening.
Thank you so much, my good friend from Minnesota. And I just want to add that while the whole issue is a very emotional